Hello, thank you for being here. Nobody is certain how or why, but Justin Townes Earle has died. The only proper tribute I can give to his memory is to share the story about the time he and I spent together. And that means revealing a lot of pretty complex information that I had intended to keep pretty close to the vest until season 3 of Cocaine and Rhinestones. But it's all related to what I wanted to say this month about season 2, anyways. So this is probably going to be a pretty long and wild ride of an update. As I mentioned on social media, the title of Cocaine and Rhinestones is secretly a reference to a conversation Justin Townes Earle and I had about 20 years ago. Neither one of us said those exact words to each other or anything like that. This is just sort of a mental shorthand I came up with to categorize all of the ideas I am now going to attempt to share with all of you. I had dropped out of high school and already been on tour with my father for a couple years when a guy named Kevin Pace showed up to a concert to ask my father if he'd be in an independent movie, which was called Blackbirds and Blazers. To my knowledge, it has never been released. When Kevin came to ask my father to be in the movie, he saw me at the show and asked if I would also be in the movie. Steve Earle was in the movie. Since his son Justin and I looked and dressed about like a small and medium-sized version of the same person at this time, I would assume Justin came to be in the movie the same way I did. In any case, I took a week or two off from the road and came back to Nashville to be in the movie. And that's where I met Justin. Neither of us were major characters in this movie, so we mostly just sat around talking, waiting for them to come get us and tell us they needed us in a scene. I didn't know that Justin existed prior to this, and he and I did not become best friends forever at this time or anything like that. But the things we talked about have evolved into my own ideas of what country music even is. I did run into him a few more times in this life, and this particular subject never came up again. So I don't know if he walked away from these discussions with the same ideas or kept pondering them as I did. It's entirely possible that he never thought about any of this ever again. I don't know. But if it helps you get an idea of how important this has always been to me, I had entirely forgotten until recently being reminded all of this happened the week of 9/11. So Justin was almost 20 years old and I was about to turn 17. And we didn't just look like each other. We came from nearly identical backgrounds in a much more specific way than just that he and I both had country singers for fathers. He'd also dropped out of high school to go on tour with his dad, who never made similar music to David Allan Coe, but they were both largely viewed the same way at this time. Steve obviously hadn't yet made his big political post 9/11 album, so everyone who only knew him from Guitar Town or Copperhead Road had no idea that he was a socialist. They just thought of him as an outlaw, like David Allan Coe, both of whom had tumultuous relationships with the industry, various controversies, and both of these guys were in heart-worn highways. So, it's a pretty common association. Like if Facebook existed at this time, you would have seen Steve Earle in all those misogynist memes about how today's pop country singers are a bunch of sissies, that kind of stuff. So the experiences Justin and I had as sons of quote unquote outlaws was all but identical. Uh, when we would compare notes, do people say this to you? Yes, people say this to me. Everything right down the line. And at some point, we inevitably began talking about the state of country music. Now, everyone knows my cutoff point for Cocaine and Rhinestones is the year 2000. If a country artist was not significant to the genre prior to that time, they are of no professional concern to me. I've stated many times there are many practical reasons for this. We are not yet far enough away from what's happening right now to be certain of what's happening or what's going to happen. These people's stories are still ongoing. These books have not been written yet, etc., etc. But even if this somehow were not the reality of the situation, I don't know how I could possibly pretend that modern commercial country music is A, interesting enough to talk about, or B, country music at all. And I'm aware this sounds like every other old man yelling at the kids to get off his lawn, but this has nothing to do with the sonic elements in the genre or pop invading the airwaves, any other bullshit like that. And Justin and I saw the writing on this particular wall when we were teenagers back in 2001. The way we had it figured, in the 90s, Garth Brooks showed the pop and rock music industry how many millions and millions of dollars there were in country music, and the carpetbaggers came to town, which is the same thing that happens after every exceptionally successful crossover period in the genre. It's what happened after, Urban Cowboy, the outlaw country movement, Harbor Valley PTA, on and on and on. Except this time, we had no reason to believe the genie would ever be put back in the bottle because we were living in a world with the internet and Clear Channel. Clear Channel's country stations had already mostly stopped playing Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, and everyone else with a wrinkle on their face whose butt didn't look good in tight jeans. The Telecommunications Act made Clear Channel the deciders, so record labels stopped trying to push singles from legacy artists and found younger country artists. And it's just a one-way street from there. Because for reasons I'm about to get into, if we're going to arbitrarily put an expiration date on country artists, we may as well replace the entire genre, which is exactly what they did. Gradually shifting to a paint-by-numbers product made for children who grew up thinking the clown show they heard on the radio was country music. Younger fans and artists who could tell the difference, who previously would have fought to overturn this trend as they'd done every other time it played out, this time they had the internet. So they were just going to go online and exist outside the system, as I'd watched my own father do without radio or the internet for most of my life. And who knows, maybe all of this will change someday. It sure has not changed yet. Up to this point, none of these ideas would have been new to either of us or anyone else actively working in country music at the time. George Strait and Alan Jackson played Murder on Music Row at the 1999 CMAs, so Justin and I were just talking about our lives. We were not baby genius analysts or way ahead of the curve on any of this shit. We both knew what Napster was, and we knew what it meant for Music Row's bottom line, and we knew they were going to have to work with Clear Channel to make up for it. We also weren't just sitting around complaining about the state of things for no reason, like a couple of jerks. We had a lot of time to kill, and we were really trying to get at the core of this thing. Why is it always so easy for the carpetbaggers to sell a bunk product to an audience who doesn't know the difference? What is the actual difference? If it's not country music these people are buying, what exactly is it? I can't provide direct quotes from either of us on any of this because all I have are my memories of the conversations and the ideas those have evolved into over time. But I can say we concluded the only thing that audience could have bought would have been a collection of illusions, which gets easier and easier to sell the less exposure an audience has to tradition and craft, which is, of course, what has been removed and what makes all the difference. And this is the same difference between a person who laughs at a joke because they got the punchline and a person who laughs just because everyone else is laughing, even though they don't know why they're laughing. This is the same difference between kids who think a Pixar movie is hilarious while the adult on the couch is sobbing uncontrollably due to things in the very same movie which don't even register in the minds of small children. There is a tradition of crafting messages around this phenomenon to simultaneously deliver multiple meanings to recipients in an audience, each according to their own level of understanding. Carl Jung argued that many, if not most, alchemical texts were an example of this. Most Kabbalists believe every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and therefore everything written in Hebrew contains hidden levels of divine meaning. The existence of this concept in music traces back at least as far as the troubadour tradition in the Middle Ages, when songs were intentionally composed to entertain everyone in a room according to their own level. The masses were entertained by superficial aspects of a performance, while others in the room were entertained according to their own ability to parse hidden meaning in puns, allegory, simile, metaphor, etc. This has been called using the green language or the language of the birds or many other things throughout the ages. When we use words like traditional to describe country music and the place it comes from, this is very specifically the place it comes from. This is the reason why Bob Dylan took a Bible into a recording studio to finish writing ostensibly secular songs. And I hope it's readily apparent this is not something that can be concisely broken down and summarized in this video or any other piece of bite-sized content. I don't know if Harlan Howard ever read anything about Kabbalah in his entire life, but what I'm saying right now is I know he never had to, because the only way to successfully and repeatedly perform this tradition is to place your entire life inside of it, which is what Harlan Howard did. And wearing a rhinestone suit was not going to put him there any quicker. And snorting a line of cocaine was not going to put him there any quicker. These are external and internal illusions. They are tricks, easily acquired by anyone with the money or means to do so, therefore of no intrinsic value to the artistic medium of country music. I have not read any of the articles or watched any of the videos on Elon Musk's new brain implant, but as far as I know, it is not yet possible to walk into a store and purchase a decade or two of experience living inside of a tradition and absorbing a craft. This is precisely why mainstream country music was doomed as soon as they put an arbitrary expiration date on country artists, especially songwriters. And nearly 2 decades after these conversations with Justin, when I realized I was going to have to actually begin a project dedicated to sorting out the fact from fiction in the history of country music, there was never a question of what I was going to call this thing. And I'm aware there are many people who have pressed play on this show based on assumptions they made about the title or the fact that they heard the mysterious rhinestone cowboy was my father or any of a dozen other reasons that I can't control. But I can control this. And you are aware that what those people heard when they press play on the show is radically different than what they expected. I consider all of this a perfect education on the tradition of country music. Because again, for anyone who missed it, subversion and disguised wit are integral, foundational elements of this tradition. And I do believe the title's signal of intent was recognized by most listeners who came to this show with foreknowledge of that tradition. And this is where everything I needed to say about the conversation with Justin begins to blend in with everything I wanted to say about season 2 in this month's update. Like rhinestone suits or any other exploitable trope of the country music genre, the word tradition has become a token buzzword used in nearly every single piece of text or conversation or marketing materials related to the genre of country music, regardless of whether the person saying, writing, or singing the word has any clue about the actual history to which that word refers. And there is almost never even an attempt to provide this history or context when this word is used. At this point, it's basically just a self-referential word divorced from any of its original meaning. There have been many academic types who recognize this phenomenon and chalk it up to there never having been a tradition in the first place. They delight in exposing the fabricated tropes of country music and knocking down the walls and uncovering all the illusions to show how there's no there. But the problem is they don't possess the experience, ability, or knowledge to recognize it even if it were there. Because they don't know how to see the tradition underneath the illusion, they assume there is no tradition underneath the illusion. To use a comparison we should all be able to understand, this is somewhat similar to a person who is not a virologist and does not understand virology, believing that must mean no one is a virologist and nobody can understand virology. And I do understand how these erroneous conclusions are reached by people who are unprepared to throw their entire lives into trying to understand something that exists outside the scope of normal research to which they and their professions are accustomed. Because, like I said, I don't believe it's possible to concisely summarize or explain this tradition, just like it's not possible to concisely summarize or explain the existence of viruses and their impact on human history. However, I do know for a fact it is possible to gain an understanding of these complex ideas. I do know it's possible to communicate these truths and traditions by delivering comprehensive examinations of the time and place of their births, lives, deaths, and rebirths. This is the intent of Cocaine and Rhinestones. As I'm in the middle of writing the second half of season 2, it seems like a good idea to prepare listeners for a few things that are going to be different this time around. Any honest and informed exploration of 20th century country music in America must eventually travel centuries back in time to the history and culture of Europe. Speaking frankly, any history of the genre which is not prepared to do that does not deserve to use the word tradition. There's no escaping this relationship, and Cocaine and Rhinestones was always designed to build this bridge. Season 1 served as a bridge from our modern world into the universe of country music. The oldest primary subject in season 1 was Spade Cooley, who owed his fame and fortune to the technology of television. Most of the artists and intros of season 1 were chosen to explore similarly modern concerns, perspectives, and questions. When the details of the Spade Cooley story proved too horrific to serve as a representative introduction to this project, it took away my plan to begin the entire series with that intro about how the word ballad comes from a Latin word, etc., etc. So I instead began the entire season with an episode on a Texas troubadour. My plan heading into the scripting of season 2 was to drop a few more stepping stones back toward European history in order to set up season 3, which at this point I may as well go ahead and reveal is going to be loosely organized around folk, gospel, and bluegrass music, none of which can be entirely or properly understood without understanding the troubadour tradition and religious culture we brought out of the Middle Ages. This is what we inherited from Europe, and that is why I intended to gloss over all of these ideas until season 3. And don't worry, the plan for season 3 is not changing because of anything I've said today. All I'm doing is announcing it much further ahead of time than I had intended. However, one of the individual pieces of European history I planned on bringing into season 2 ended up being much more intricately relevant to the story of George Jones and other aspects of season 2 than I had previously realized. In past updates, when I've talked about using multiple intros in season 2 to tell a parallel ongoing story, this piece of European history is what I was talking about. And last month, when I said I realized I'd written more of the season than I knew, and I had much more of it done than I knew, it was because I followed the thread of this individual piece of European history back and ended up at a web that is now wrapped around most of the second season. And I want to be clear here, not only is this a good thing, it is an awesome thing. However, this is also an audio podcast focused mostly on audio recordings. And another reason I had intended to wait for season 3 to go this far back in the past is because there are no audio recordings of any kind from before the 19th century. Season 1 does have a few pretty lengthy passages in which you're only listening to my speaking voice, which is uninterrupted by any song clips or other audio. The plan was to slightly increase the occurrence of these passages throughout season 2, after which point I figured I would have earned the speaking time required to pull off season 3. As we are all so very aware, in the year 2020, plans change. The main content of season 2 will still be presented in the format everyone knows and loves from season 1. And as I've mentioned, nearly every episode in season 2 looks like it's going to be close to 2 hours, if not longer than 2 hours. So everyone's getting even more of what they liked about this thing the first time. But I do want to be upfront about the fact that many of the episode intros are also longer this time around, and they feature stories about things that happened a very, very long time ago. These stories are not explicitly about music at all, but they are crucial to understanding country music. If these events had not taken place, there is no possibility of 20th century country music becoming what it was. And since there are no audio artifacts from this period of history, the only thing I can do is tell these stories with my own voice. While I don't expect this will be a deal breaker for a significant percentage of the audience, and I honestly don't care if it is because it's the only right thing to do, I am entirely certain there will be a few people who are not fond of this development. And right here's where Justin Townes Earle and 1,000 other country music singers I could name would say, I'm not a fucking jukebox. But what I'm gonna do instead is gently remind everyone that the best thing about podcasts is you can fast forward the parts you don't like. All right, I'm sure I have shared enough to give everyone who thinks I'm a crazy person sufficient evidence to go on, so this seems like a pretty good place to stop. I hope the information in this update is exciting for most of you. It's exciting to me to talk about these things and think about these things. And while This season has been a much greater undertaking than I had anticipated. It is rewarding to have all of this stuff come together and present itself in this way. I am extremely eager to get this season finished and share it with the world. So, thank you again. Thank you forever. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you next month.